Hello. I got to tell you, you guys are the first service. I mean, don't tell them, but they were just like. It reminds me of a church service years ago, a church, and there was and somebody that were it's reasonably crowded, and somebody died during the service. It took the EMTs 15 minutes to figure out which person it was. And so it wasn't that bad, but they were pretty low energy. First service. I'm glad you guys are more with it. So you're welcome. You can use that whenever you want. It's an old joke, but hey. Barry mentioned the Reconnect, the connection group relaunch, and of course we've got some groups that are going already and have been never stopped. But if you're curious, see, one of the cool things about this, these are for 6 weeks. This is for 6 weeks. Starts in a couple weeks. It runs for 6 weeks. We pick the night you can show up or the day you can show up and do for 6 weeks, and they're going to have the questions will be based on the sermon for that Sunday. So you just come in, you do that discussion, and 6 weeks you can find out just how much you're actually going to like connection groups once you get involved. And so it's just a way for you to get plugged in and get started. So I really encourage you. The QR code is in your bulletin, in your notes. They got a paper in the back, like you said. Also, I'm going to put this screen back up, or they're going to put this screen back up at the end of the service. And if you sort of scamper up here, you can actually use that QR code after the service even to get to the thing to fill it out, and we'll send it to our spreadsheet generals who will coordinate everything and put everybody together, and it's going to be a good time. So, all right, one other thing before I get going, we have a group of people who every week are outside and they're directing cars and they're helping you find a place to park and they're smiling and pointing, and they did it today in that weather. And I think if you see any of those people on your way out, make sure you thank them for that service, because they don't get paid for that. They volunteered to get up this morning and go out in that weather to do that, and that's a worthwhile thing. So make sure you thank a couple of them on your way out as you see somebody for that. Okay, finishing up a series today. We started a series with an incredibly named title, 2023. Spent hours working on the title, and what we've done over the past 3 weeks, first week we're talking about two of the biggest phrases we use. We use two phrases that kind of define us and who we are. And the first phrase is, we help you become the person God created you to be. And so the first week we talked about how to do that. How does that happen in a life? The second phrase we use is, we do things that matter. And last week we talked about why. Why do we want to do things that matter? We talked about that. Well, today we're going to talk about how to do things that matter. Because I'm sure some of you are like, I would like to do something. I have no idea what. I have no idea how. How do you do things that matter? And that's what we're talking about today. And we're going to start out by reading a passage out of Matthew chapter 25. Some of you know this story, and we're going to read it. And let's go ahead and just get started. We're going to jump right in, okay? And by the way, just so you know, we're going to cover the 4 blank. You have 4 blanks on your sheets if you're blank takers, okay? You have 4 blanks. I'll be done in 15 minutes with those blanks. You are not done when I'm done with the blanks. We're just warmed up. That's just setting the groundwork. So when you finish filling out the last blank, I don't want anybody putting their stuff away and shuffling around. I know what you're doing, putting your coat on. Don't. No, we're just barely warmed up when we fill in the blanks today, all right? Because we're going to cover the passage, and then we're going to be really, really practical. This is going to be the most practical sermon you've heard in a long time, okay? So, Jesus is talking to the people, and he says, again, it will be like a man. So, at the end of time, he said, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To each one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who would receive 5 bags of gold, and a lot of you are used to a translation that says talents. Remember that one? This is the 5 talents, okay? He received the 5 bags of gold, went at once, put his money to work, and gained 5 more bags. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come share in your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come share in your master's happiness." Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. "Master," he said, "I know that you're a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you." His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you know that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money in deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him," the 1 bag guy, "and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now, first thing that might have struck you as I read that was the guy with the 1 bag who buried it, he basically gets sent to hell. And some of you are possibly going, does that mean if I don't do anything for God, that I don't get to spend eternity with God? Do I go to hell if I don't do anything for God? Well, first reminder, your salvation isn't based on what you do, it's based on what Jesus did. See, Jesus died on a cross for your sins. He paid the debt for your sins. So you don't get to heaven based on what you do. Also, second thing, Jesus loved to take digs at the religious folk of his day. And the religious folk of his day, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, had been given 1 bag of gold. It was called the Bible. They had the Old Testament. They had the Hebrew Scriptures. And they were supposed to take it and share it. They were supposed to be out multiplying it by giving it to people and telling people about it, both Jews and non-Jews. And these religious leaders had taken the Bible and they had buried it in their backyard. So he's digging at them and saying, you guys were entrusted with something. It was only 1, but it was important and you didn't use it, so therefore, bam. Now that's the salvation aspect of it. Now we can deal with the works aspect of it, because there's a basic concept throughout Scripture, especially the New Testament, which is if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, God starts changing you, and that change results in something. And last week we talked about how that change includes the fact that you now have a desire to help the least and reach the lost. It may be just an infant desire, it may be just a little bit, but it's there and it needs to be nurtured. And so that's how we'll look at this. And let me just give you like 4 quick points on this passage. And the first one is God gives us different types of resources. One person got 5 bags, one got 2, and one got 1. But what was it they really got? Okay? Well, everybody gets different stuff. If you notice, we're all different. Some of you have certain skills, some have other skills. Some of you are really good at one thing, some of you are really bad at one thing. I mean, you know, we structure our church staff around the fact that Steve has certain gifts and Steve doesn't have certain gifts. Okay, so we're always looking for people who can complement each other and work together. And in 1 Peter, Peter said, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Each of us is given something. And I believe here's 4 basic types of things that we get. And we'll talk about all of these later. We're going to give you the overview now. We get talents, gifts, and passions. We'll talk about what the difference is between those 3 words. We have finances, we have time, and we have opportunities. And each of us is given different levels of those. And I would say it this way, that some of us are given, say, 1 bag of talent and 3 bags of finances and 2 bags of time and 4 bags of opportunity, something like that. All of us have different numbers in each of these levels, but we're all responsible for them. Now, one of the most important things about those things that God gave us is that God gave them to us, so our resources are not really ours. They're not ours. They don't belong to us. You ever worked for some place where they gave you stuff when you went to work there? You come in the door and they give you keys, and they give you a computer, and they give you a grenade launcher, depending on what kind of work you're in. And what do they want from those? They expect you to use them for them and then do what when you're done? Give them back. That's the point. You don't get to take the grenade launcher home with you, right? Right? If you do, let me see it. I'd love to see it. But anyway, if we could find a way to fire that puppy on summer. Anyway, I've never used a grenade launcher. But anyway, we're given them. They're not ours. They belong to God, and God gives them to us to use for others. Matter of fact, it says he called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. And in the end, they were expected to bring it back. Okay? Matter of fact, 1 Corinthians, Paul said, what do you have that you were not given? And if it was given to you, how can you brag? There's nothing you have that you didn't get. Whether it was natural or whether it was something that you were trained in, you received it. When I look at me, anybody look at themselves and see their parents? For good and for bad, right? Anything I can do well, I can show you which of my parents, or they're both of my parents, did it well. Okay? I received it. It was a gift. Michael Green says it this way: any resource we have is actually an investment with which the master makes in us, his servants. So everything that you have, all your resources, everything you have, God placed it in you to use to advance his kingdom, like we talked about last week, to bring his cause on earth. That's why you have it, to help the least and reach the lost. That's why you got the stuff you got, okay? And this one's really important. One of the big messages of that whole passage was, it's not okay to do nothing because we can only do a little. I mean, you run into that a lot. People will say, oh, can you? And I really can't do much. I can't do much, so I'm going to do nothing. Well, how did that work out for the guy? Huh? How did it work out for the guy who only had a little and did nothing with it? To quote Jesus, his master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant." I don't know, but when I stand before God, there are certain things I'd like to hear and certain things I don't want to hear. And let me just say, wicked, lazy servant is way up on the I don't want to hear that one list. Right? And so he's saying, even if I give you one bag, if you just have just this much, I expect you to use it to advance God's kingdom. Okay? And Spurgeon says that the reason he used the one person is that's the person who's most tempted to do nothing, is the ones of us when there's an area where we don't have much. We have a tendency, I can't do anything. And so, no, if you don't have much, you may not be able to do as much. Did you notice in that story that there were the one person had 5, one had 2. The person with the 5 went, multiplied it, came back with 5 more. He made 5 bags of gold for his master. The other one made 2 bags of gold for his master. They got the exact same reward. The exact same statement, well done, good and faithful servant, was exact word for word, letter for letter, the exact same reward for the one who had the enormous ability and the one who had just a little bit, okay? So the issue is not how much we have, but what we do with what we have, okay? And then what should we do with what we have? This is your last blank, so you can just doodle from now on out, okay? We should use our resources to do things that matter. Okay? We use our resources to do things that matter. Because, of course, that's last week. Of course you're going to do things that matter as opposed to wasting your time. Okay? So, now we're going to take the rest of our time, and I'm just going to go through those things I talked about, and we're going to talk about how. This is, like I said, really practical. How do you use the things? And we talked about talents, gifts, passions, finances, time, opportunities. How do we use them to do things that matter? Let's start with this one. Talents, gifts, passions. I'm going to need to break those down. I could have just used like abilities. I could have said abilities, and you're going, okay, abilities. But I want to break that down because there's 3 different things happening here. First one, talents is what you can do naturally. It's what your natural skill set is. You can just do that, okay? So, some of you are really good at speaking. You can talk to a stranger. Some of you can't talk to people, but man, you can play with spreadsheets. You're like the spreadsheet master, right? And some of you, the thought of standing in front of this group of people and talking to everybody, that terrifies you. But you get one-on-one with somebody, and next thing you know, they're sharing important things, and you're speaking into their lives, and it just happens without you even trying. So each of us has things that are natural talents. Now, gifts, those are spiritual gifts. And what happens is when we become a Christian, the Holy Spirit moves into our lives, into us, and he kind of supercharges certain things. Now, for most people, not for everybody, most people, God takes a talent that you already have and he gives it a supernatural kickstart. So suddenly when you use that ability, God's able to work through you and do really powerful, really amazing things. Now, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he goes straight, he's God, so he doesn't follow all my rules. He doesn't do things the way I expect him to all that often. But sometimes, I know some people who were shy and stuttered, and when they accepted Christ, God turned them into preachers, and they were very good at it. Like, wow. But most of the time, what are you naturally good at? And what is God superpowering? And then you find your passions. Now, you know how you find out what your passions are? What makes you taller? Your passions make you taller. Some of you guys are going, please tell me this. I want to be 5'2" so bad. Okay, I was at my connection group this past Sunday and talking with one of the members, one of our friends in the group. And we're talking about what he does for a living. We're having just a basic conversation. And we're covering different things, and we hit one spot. And suddenly, this one topic, this one area of work that he does, suddenly he started talking faster. And his hands started moving more. And he leaned forward, and then he leaned up. He got taller right in front of me. It's one of my favorite things to watch for when I'm talking to anybody, is every one of you has something that makes you taller. Some things even that get you taller. And if I can help you find, or anybody can help you find what makes you taller, we found your passions. Now, some of your passions are really helpful, and some of them are worthless. But you have passions that are valuable to serve God. And what we need to do is get you finding these things. And it's easy. Matter of fact, you don't notice it. I've never been talking to anybody, and I say, you just got taller, and they go, yeah, I know. They never notice it happens. You never notice when you're talking about something, you get taller. But ask somebody who knows you and say, what makes me taller? What topics, when we talk about these things, get me excited? I mean, if you get me cornered and we start talking about teaching the Bible, I'll lean in, lift up, my hands go, I talk even faster. When I talk about training young pastors in like Armenia and the places like that, I get excited, I talk faster, my hands start moving quicker. Now, there are things that don't make me move faster. There are lots and lots of things, it's like I'm talking about the weather, But what makes me taller? Ask your friends what makes you taller. Ask them to ask people that are close to you to start watching. What makes me taller? What makes me lean in, lift up, and get excited? Because when you take these three things and put them together, that's a recipe for great stuff for God. That's a recipe for things that really matter to happen for you. And everybody's got theirs. Because you find out what makes you taller, then you ask, how can I use it to serve others? And when you combine those things, and trust me, every one of you has that. Everyone. You're going, I don't have anything for God. Then you're calling God a liar. Well, the Bible says that when we become Christians, God gives every one of us spiritual gifts. I've never met anybody who doesn't have some talents. And I've never, ever met anybody that if we talked long enough, I couldn't find their passions. Okay? And I'm not special. I'm just looking for it. So you listen, find your passions, and say, how can I use that to serve others? Does that make sense? See how that works? This is your sweet spot. Okay? Find your sweet spot. Some people, you talk about missions, and they go, I get excited. So anyway, that's gifts, talents, and passions. Second area, this is the one people don't like to talk about, but we got to talk about it, which is finances. Because God, he uses money as the initial point of the story. If he's going to use money as the initial point of the story, it must matter. Okay? And the first step in using your finances to do things that matter is to get them under control. That's step one. I know so many people, and there is a ton of money coming in, and it's all going right back out to nothing. Because the house payment's too high, and the car payments are too high, and everything's too high, and the money just disappears, and there's no way to do anything that matters with the money because it's already spent before it shows up. Some of you like that? Don't raise your hand. Okay? You can elbow your spouse, but don't raise your hand. Okay? Online, you're all the money, and the number one step, the first step to doing things that matter with your money is get them under control. Manage your finances well. Okay? Get yourself a spreadsheet. Do whatever it takes to get your money under control. Sell one car. Do whatever it takes to get your finances under control, because God can't use you financially if you don't have any spare, okay? And then the next step is that stewarding finances requires faith, because here's what's going to happen. You start getting the finances under control. You start managing it. You're putting money aside. There's money going to that savings account over there. Wow, savings accounts, what are those? They have them. And money is going into the savings account, and it builds up. And next thing you know, mine. You grab hold of that savings account, and you put your trust there. But you know what it says in Hebrews about honoring God? Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. The only way that you please God is by risking. By the way, that happens for all the things. That happens with your talents and your gifts and your passions. If you're not risking, you're not serving God at the full limit. Found this out over as I've been teaching, because I don't have tons of money, but I have it's not wrong to say I have a fair amount of talent. I can teach. God gave me the ability to teach the word. I can do it, okay? And if you have a certain talent level and you've been at it for a while, you can develop the ability to coast, because you know exactly what it takes to get things done. If I want to, I can coast to preaching. I can just develop the sermons, clank, 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 put them out, push them out, assembly line. I can do that. But what I've found is when I take a risk, how can I present that in a way that really grabs people? How can I do that? Will it upset anybody? It might. I don't know if you've heard it or not. I have been known to upset some people while I'm preaching. I don't know if you've never heard that before. You're not aware that happens. But I've done it once or twice a week for the past 20 years. But I've found when I risk, when I do the thing that's not expected, when I go outside the standard and I'm not using some formula, that's when God is free to work the greatest, because I took a risk for him, because I took faith. There was faith in it. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. That applies with your giftedness. It also applies with your finances. That you have to be able to say, that money in the savings account, that's God's money. And he can do with it whatever he wants to do. Does that make sense? You don't like that as much, right? But that's what happens. Now, here's the next step in that process. So you develop good habits, and you start using faith in that, and then you start working on increasing your percentages and your diversity. I know that sounds heavy, but what I mean is this. Some people, some of you, you're throwing 20 in the offering every week. Throwing 50, I don't know. I have no idea what anybody gives but me and my wife. It's not my business. It's between you and God what you give. So this is not some judgmental thing. And by the way, I'm not trying to get money. We're doing okay financially as a church. This is not some desperation plea. I'm pointing out your spiritual growth, okay? And what was I talking about? Your percentages and diversity. See, God puts up this interesting standard in the Old Testament, and it gets echoed a couple times in the New Testament, which is to bring all the tithe. Tithe means 10% of your income into the storehouse, so there'll be enough food in my temple. If you do, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I will open the windows of heaven for you. I will pour out a blessing so great you won't have enough room to take it in. Try it, put me to the test. Okay? So God establishes this sort of a baseline in the Old Testament of 10%. Now, here's the thing. My wife and I were tithing before we met, so we've never even had a discussion about it. It's just something we do. I remember the very first job I did, the first paycheck I got, I gave $3.25 to the church because my first job didn't pay much. We've always tithed. It's always been part of it. And for some people, that concept is terrifying because your finances, are really, really tight, okay? And just the concept of trusting God with that kind of money, I don't think God's like all that mean about this. I don't think he's like going, yes, no. I think he's asking for faith. And so for some of you, I really believe you need to start saying, okay, can I give 1% to God? Instead of throwing in a certain amount every time, can I give 1%, 2%? And then let God build that up. Because what he says is when you start doing that, God takes care of you and pours blessing into your life, okay? So trust him. It says, try me, put it to the test, and start giving, and just build it up. Just increase your percentages, okay? Now, some of you could well be in a position where the whole concept of 10%, I believe, is almost completely out of it's just not possible. You might be a single mom, and there is no way you're getting to 10%. And God's not mean, okay? But a lot of you, it's just about decisions you've made. The only reason you can't tithe is you've made bad decisions. You need to unmake some of those decisions and start working that way toward that spot, okay? And again, I'm not checking on you and I'm not judging you. I'm just telling you this is where God says he wants us to sort of be as a baseline. Now, where I differ from a lot of people, number one, like I said, there are some people I know it's not possible, and that's one reason I don't want to know, because I don't want to judge. I'm not judging anybody. It's just that trusting, that faith in God piece. But for some people, 10% isn't enough. I'm being honest with you. There's a story that Jesus tells. It's not a story, something actually happened. He watched it happen. And he's at the temple, and they're giving money. And these rich people come by, and they're just basically just throwing big bucks in. And then a widow comes along and throws in 2 little coins. And Jesus says, you know, see that widow right there? The one that you heard the clanking noise because her 2 little coins? She gave more than everybody else because hers, to paraphrase, her amount mattered to her. It was significant to her. It had meaning to her. And to be honest, there can come a point in your life where 10% isn't meaningful. Does that make sense? It's not significant to some. Not for plenty of people, that's a big enough number. And I'm not trying, again, I'm not judging you. I'm saying, ask God, where's your faith level at? And some people, I've heard of people who reach the point where they're giving 90% because they're making bunches of money. And they know they don't need that much, so they're giving 90 and keeping 10. Be faithful with what God gives you. Do things that matter by making sure your percentage is where it needs to be. And also that you're getting diverse in it. My wife and I tithe to this church, probably a little more than that. We also give to different charities. We help World Vision. We do things with Kiva, which is a microloan organization that lends money to small amounts of money to people all over the world. We do things like that because we're supposed to be giving, okay? And so we do that. And here's a prayer Tim Keller taught. I read it somewhere. I've never met the man, but I like him. And he starts out by saying something about, God, give me the right motives when I ask this. But then he says, let me make enough and have enough to give without sparing to many people. God, the money that comes to me, I'm going to pass out as much as I can handle. As much as I can, I'm going to give it away. So give me enough to just give. Let enough pass through my hands so I can help. And while I'm nowhere near them, I am not your example on how to live with the finance stuff. So don't be going, well, Steve's just figuring it out. Steve's working all the time. Steve's not great at this stuff. But one real cool thing that's happened over the past 5 years or so as I've reached a place where I'm a book person. I don't know if you figured that out. And I'll run into somebody, and there's a book I think could really help them, and I'll send them the book. I'll just buy a copy and shoot it to them. Because it's like, I can afford that. I mean, you know, most books are the tip at some restaurants, or maybe even less than that. So I can do that. And so it's not uncommon for me to just throw a book at somebody, because this book can help you. And that's what we're talking about here, reaching the point with your finances, with everything else, where if God's blessing you, you're able to then just scatter the blessings. Because God doesn't give you money so you can have a big account. God gives you money so you can be a blessing to others. That make sense? I know nobody likes to talk about this. So let's talk about something everybody does like to talk about, time. Because all of you have too much of that. Here's the thing. 168. You know what 168 is? That's how many hours you have in a week. Now, everybody in the room makes different amounts of money. You make a different amount than he does. Everybody makes a different amount of money. You know how much time you got? 168. Every one of you has the exact same amount of time. It's all about how you spend your 168. Now, I will be honest, there are seasons when it comes to time. Like, if you're a young family and you got 3 kids at home that are getting the real mobile stage where they want to do everything, you're going to have trouble. That 168 is going to be a challenge for you. It's going to be a stickler to hit that part. Some of you, it's not a big deal. But for everybody, the key to understand, the key to managing your money, managing your time. Managing your money is harder than time because there's only one thing you need to do to manage your time. You need to learn to say no. It's not that complicated. I'm going to rant for just a second. I apologize. It's okay to say no to your kids. It's okay to say that's not a good option. It's okay to teach them good values and how they spend their time. I mean, I'm looking out here. I'm just going to scan this real fast. You guys, if you've been here, you've heard me say this. Your kids aren't playing in the NBA. I'm looking, I see it. No, nobody in this room is going to have a kid in the NBA. We have a couple in the church. I have to make sure that they're in the other service because they might. Her dad was a basketball center at a major college, so they got the height. There's a possibility one of their kids could play something like that. But everybody else, it ain't happening. My kids aren't going to the NBA. My grandkids aren't going to the NBA because they got my genes. Hey, there's way too much Steve going through their veins. They're not doing that. And so for me to sacrifice things that matter for things that don't is crazy. Now, it's okay. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy your kids. Let them play. Let them be kids. But don't let that stuff drive you. Because what you're doing is you're saying yes to things that aren't all that important. And the crucial thing is you have to say no to some good things so you can say yes to things that really matter. Okay? I'm not saying don't have fun. I'm not saying don't let your kids do gymnastics. I'm saying there have to be lines because that 168 ain't changing. Okay? That is not going anywhere. Some of you guys act like you can borrow against that like it's money. Like there's a time credit card that you can somehow borrow it and suddenly you got 172 a week. No, you got 168. That's all there is. Okay? So that's for the younger people. Let me talk to the little more mature people, because retirement is like winning the time lottery. Okay? It's like you reach an age and suddenly they say, here you go, here's 40 to 60 extra hours every week. Do with it what you want. I mean, seriously, you know what happens? That's what happens when you retire, because you were spending 40 to 60 hours at your job. Now that time's free, and I know some people, I've got some good friends, and they have done an incredibly good job with that. They didn't suddenly go find a 60-hour volunteer thing, but they went out and found some real meaningful things they could do with that extra time. I've got other friends who thought, you know what, I need to play golf 60 hours a week. I'm going, I'm not sure what God's going to say when you stand before him and he says, what did you do with that time that I gave you? But I don't think well done, good and faithful golfer is one of the things he's going to say. So if God gives you a bunch of extra time, just like if you won the money lottery, you'd say, how can I spend some of this? Maybe not all of it. How can I use this to do things that matter? If you win the time lottery, look for ways to invest that time to do things that matter. And finally, the last one of these pieces, opportunities. This is really important to understand. God often works in interruptions. I would say God usually works in interruptions. God's always working in interruptions. Jesus is going around constantly being interrupted, and every time he's interrupted, he does something amazing. But the only way to work in interruptions is you have to have margin in your life in all the areas we talked about. Let's say, for instance, that you're sitting in church. I heard a guy use this illustration once, that you're sitting in church and you start a conversation with the young woman next to you, and you find out that she's a single mom and she didn't get enough hours this past week, and she's $200 short on her rent. And you can tell she's legit. You've seen her in church before. You know who she is. This is not a panhandler. This is somebody in your church who's sitting next to you and they need $200 to make it through the month. If you've margined your money, what can you do? You pay her rent. If you haven't margined your money, well, I'll be praying for you. You have to build the margin. If you haven't built time margin, you can, let's say you have time margin in your life. You've got some space. By the way, I block schedule my life. I block schedule. I don't say I'm going to do something in this hour, this hour, this hour. I say this afternoon I'm doing this. You know what that means? If my next door neighbor starts, if I'm getting the mail or taking the dog for a walk, and my next door neighbor starts saying, "Oh man, I'm having a really rough time," I can say, "Oh, tell me about it." And if I take half an hour, hour and a half talking with him, my life's not over. But if I don't have any time margin and my neighbor says, "Oh, I'm having a rough time," say, "We'll have to catch up sometime and talk about that." And you just walked away from an opportunity because you didn't put margin in your life. So you need to build in margin so you can take advantage of the opportunities, okay? And finally, and this is the thing, because even if you don't have much time, find some to do something for God. You don't want to be the person with one bag of time and you didn't use any of it for God. You know why we do 2 services? Do you know why we have 2 services every week? Really honest, we have enough chairs we could meet in one service. We could do it. Okay, this is a big room. We got a lot of space for children. We have 2 services so people can serve in children's ministry one service and attend the next. That's the only reason we do 2 services. That's the biggest reason we do 2 services. Why do we do that? We're giving you time margin. I want to do something for God. Well, serve one service, come to the next. You already drove. To me, transportation is the biggest waste of time, is because you just spent half an hour getting someplace. So we took that out. Well, how long it takes to get here? You come, serve one service, attend the next, attend a service, serve the next. So, looking for something to do? Go work in children's ministry. Say, "I'm not good with teaching kids." You don't have to. Some people have to just wrangle kids. Like my wife's an amazing teacher, so she taught first service. She's sitting there now. She taught first service. She's here this service. She taught first service. I'm sure it went amazingly well because she's gifted in that whole stuff about abilities, gift, talents, passion. That's my wife when it comes to kids. She's amazing at it. I'm terrible at it, but there's a reason she's working that building and I'm working this building. Okay? She's gifted. You know what she needs? People to wrangle the kids. I was speaking in chapel at a Christian school in Fayetteville this past week, and the first chapel was the junior high kids, and then it's high school kids and the junior high kids. And I noticed there were about 3 or 4 of the teachers who, during my talk, got up from the back and went over and sat down next to somebody, almost always a boy. Okay? Because what they saw was that kid's about to get in trouble. He's going to disrupt this whole area, and they just went over and sat down next to him, and that's all they did. About 3 of them did that during, and I appreciated every one of them because they meant I could keep talking. I could keep doing what I was doing. I could keep using my gifts. And by the way, we have a youth group that meets on Sunday night. You know what they could use? Some people that just slide over and sit down next to a kid who might be getting ready to cause trouble. That's all you got to do. You say, "I'm not good with teenagers." We just need teen wranglers. We got the teachers. We need the wranglers. We need the ones that come sit down. Because let me tell you what can happen if you do that. Say, "I'm not good with teens." You probably don't even know that. I'm betting you when you say, "I'm not good with teens," it's because you haven't been around any teenagers since you were one. Or maybe you parented one. You've just avoided them like the plague, and I fully understand that. Okay, if you're avoiding junior high kids, I'm not going to judge you harshly for that. But you don't know what your gifts, talents, and passions are till you try things. Do you know what age groups I've taught in the church? Not this church, but church in my lifetime? I was a nursery worker more than once. I taught preschoolers. I've taught young children. I've taught junior high. I've taught high school. I've taught young singles. I've taught young marrieds, I've taught regular old adults, and I've taught old adults, senior adults. I've taught them all. And I know I'm better in this building. All right, we learned that by doing it. The only way you find out is by doing it, because here's what's liable to happen. Matter of fact, I guarantee you, for some people who say, "Okay, I'll try the youth. I'll try to work with the youth. They need warm bodies. There's a need. I can fill it." You're gonna go over and there's gonna be a kid and he's a little trouble, and you're gonna sit down next to him just to keep the boy or girl a little quieter, just to keep him less likely to cause trouble. And you're just gonna sit there, and you're gonna say hi, and then afterwards, you'll say just something nice to the kid. You're gonna do something really weird. You're gonna treat him like a person. Because there's an awful lot of people don't treat junior high kids like people. And what a lot of them just need is somebody who treats them like a human being. And so you treat them like you don't do anything spectacular, you just treat them like a person. And you say, hi. And after a few weeks, you're sitting there, and this kid that causes trouble, and you've been nice to him this whole time, shares something with you, tells you some secret about their life, about something that makes their life hard, about why they might be trouble sometimes. And you don't know how to answer the question, but you listen. And then during the week, you go do some research, talk to the youth leaders, and you find out what it is. So the next time when he comes back, you say, "Oh, yeah, I've been thinking about what we talked about, and why don't you try this?" And next thing you know, you've bonded with that kid. And do you know how many people, junior high and high school, lives are changed because one adult just pays attention? Do you know what? How many people? Any of you guys in here? You remember when you were young? I remember a person right my life. One man who just paid attention to me. You know, my parents paid attention, but it was different when it's somebody outside your family, somebody who came and paid attention. And some of these teenagers, some of these preteens, they just need somebody to pay attention. Okay, so find a need and fill it. If at the end of the service, we're going to have our youth guy, Trey's will be back in that back corner. Just go talk to him. Say, you know what? I can sit next to kids. Okay? Maybe you say, well, I'm pretty sure teenagers aren't a thing, but I can do kids. Or I can do tech because I know how to push buttons. I can play an instrument. I can stand in a cold parking lot. Find a need and fill it. And what will happen is you try a few things, and suddenly, this is when the magic happens. You just find an opportunity, and you try opportunities, and one of these opportunities, you take the opportunity, and next thing you know, you're home talking to somebody about it, and while you're talking about the opportunity, you get taller. You didn't expect it. You weren't anticipating it, but suddenly you get taller. And then you start living into one of my many favorite verses. This is what Jesus said in Matthew 6. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, you're used to that. You know what's weird about that verse? That is not a prediction. It's not a prophecy. It's a statement of fact. Where you put your treasure, that's where your heart goes. Today, lots of a couple of NFL games today. And they'll zoom in and they'll show some people, and they're painted head to toe in the color of their team. And I'm not opposed to sports. I was a sports editor for my school paper. But you'll see these people, and they've been there all day long, and they've been eating, and they spent thousands of dollars on tickets throughout the year just to get to this spot. And you ask them where their heart is, and they'll say, my heart is with my team. You cut me, I bleed that color. And why is that? It's where they put their treasure. Again, I'm not opposed to sports and rooting for your team and all that stuff. But when I stand before God, and he said, where'd you put your treasure? I want it to be something that really, really matters. And the way that I get my heart there is to get my treasure there, to use my talents and abilities for God in those areas, to help the people that I can help with my talents and abilities, take my money and use it to help others. To take my time and invest it in others, to take the opportunities God gives me and use them to help others, because then my heart starts shifting to heaven. And you know what the best side effect of this is? Some of you are like struggling to do the church thing. You got the church thing, it's hard, you got to get up, you got to get here, it's really hard to do church stuff. All that stuff gets hard. And you know why it's hard? Your heart's not with God yet. Your heart's not in God things. Because that's not where you've invested your treasure. But as you invest your treasure, your heart has no choice but to follow it. So I challenge you. If you don't think your heart's in things of God, move your treasure where the things of God are. And watch your heart follow your treasure. Okay? A couple ways we talked about ministries. Join a ministry here. We make it really hard to join a ministry here. Just walk up to somebody serving and say, how do I get involved? First service, we had some for youth. Like, we already ran the background check on the person. They're ready to go. I think they're ready for this evening. I don't know. We'll run a background check on you. We'll hook you up. We'll get you trained. We'll get you out there. That's what it takes. And we talk a lot, too. If you want to know how to be part of this church and like to talk to somebody about that, we have orientation chats for that. But get your heart where your heart needs to be. And the way you do that is by taking your abilities and talents and passions and your finances and your time and pushing them where you want your heart to go, and then watch your heart follow. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much that you love us enough to let us be part of your work, that your kingdom matters and you are letting us be part of it. Father, help us to put our treasure where we want our heart to be. Help us to put our treasure in doing things that matter. Put our money there, put our time there, put our talents there. Look for opportunities there. Father, use us and transform us as we put our treasure where we want our heart to be. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.